What if the key to a flourishing Earth lies in how we navigate the greatest cultural transition in history? Hi, I'm Steve Melville from the Planet Project. Since the spring of 2022, we've published 29 different blog articles that explore humanity's path towards a flourishing Earth. And you can find them on our website at planetproject.io. But this month, we're going to try something new. We're going to try a video instead of a blog article. So I guess it's a vlog that we're doing this month. And the video features excerpts from a series that I recently led within the Design School for Regenerating Earth. And that series was entitled Realizing the Promise of the Earth Regeneration Fund. You can find that full series, all 4 sessions, the recordings of those sessions, in Planet Community or through the Design School. In this month's blog, we want to focus on a key theme from the series introduction, the cultural transition that is emerging and that we must successfully navigate to manifest the vision of a flourishing Earth. At the Planet Project, we call this the Great Transition, and it's been the subject of a number of recent blogs. So if we step back and look at the crises that we face, right? Climate change gets a lot of press. The polarization of wealth, the extreme polarization of wealth. The industrial ag model is leading to desertification. 10,000 years it took to develop topsoil since the last ice age. We've degraded 70% of that topsoil just in the last 50 years of industrial agriculture. We're experiencing a mass extinction event with huge biodiversity loss. Pollinator collapse, ecological collapse, food insecurity, climate refugees, an erosion of democracy, erosion of truth, political polarization. This is the cascade of crises. Now, how can we possibly move beyond our heartbreak if we start to recognize this? And even if we can embrace this emotionally, how can we begin to cognitively get our heads around solving for all of this? And if we try and attack them as point solutions, as many are, we don't see that as a path that can lead to success. We need to step back and say, what are the root causes behind this cascade of crises? And what Roger highlighted in his book is that the meta-crisis really is rooted in a stage of culture and consciousness. And so in this book, he goes back through the history of humanity and identifies 4 major stages in the cultural evolution of humanity. We're in the middle right now of the 4th stage, which he termed material culture. And this was rooted in a lot of research. About 5,000 years ago, we shifted into this thing called material culture. And it is, in fact, the deep assumptions, the unexamined assumptions of this material culture that gives rise to all the crises we see today. And so if we're going to avoid civilizational collapse, it demands a profound shift in culture at global scale, a complete reimagining of who we are and how we interact as people and as participants in the web of life. And so the good news is that we are in the midst of this cultural shift. The evidence shows that there is emerging out of the very the collapse, the crisis that we face as a result of the means of material culture. Those are creating the conditions for fundamental change. And in fact, fundamental change is happening. It's spontaneously emerging all around the globe. And if we can just accelerate that shift, it can give rise to an entirely different set of conditions. It can give rise to a flourishing Earth. And we refer to that as the Great Transition. And the goal of the Planet Project is to try and accelerate that great transition. So let's look at what are the essential mimetic shifts of the Great Transition. And in the Planet Project, we go into a lot more detail on different mimetic shifts, but we've distilled it down recently to three core shifts. So what are the three fundamental assumptions that give rise to material culture? The first is this meme of separation, this worldview that says the universe consists of separate material objects. People are separate from each other. People are separate from nature and from the sacred. We're just billiard balls bouncing around, subject to forces in a purposeless universe. The second fundamental meme of material culture is the meme of domination. And this has been explored at great depth by Riane Eisler. But it's this notion of domination and subservience hierarchy. I get ahead by dominating others, and if I can't dominate others, then I need to be subservient to them to earn their protection. It's all about power. It's about control. It's about competition. And the third major mimetic foundation of the material culture is exploitation. If we're going to win the game of domination, people and the natural world are seen as resources to be exploited in order to dominate. All of these memes reinforce each other. So these form what I refer to as a memeplex, in the same way that a geneplex is a collection of genes that replicates together better than they can replicate individually. These memes all support and reinforce one another. So they tend to replicate as a memeplex. In planetary culture, the meme of separation is being transcended into the direction of that recognizes the fundamental interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent nature of reality. It's the meme of interconnection, of oneness. And the meme of domination is giving way to the meme of partnership that's rooted in mutual respect, shared power, and collaboration. And the meme of exploitation is giving way to the meme of reverence, a sacred regard for the living universe and all that's in it. This is also a memeplex. Each of these memes mutually reinforces the other. This is what we mean by the mimetic shifts of the Great Transition. So how could this cultural evolution evolve? How might this great transition unfold? And to that, I'm going to look through a couple of lenses. One is the structural layers of cultural evolution that came from Marvin Harris in a book he wrote in 1979. And he basically said, structurally, we can think about culture at three layers. The foundational, the infrastructure layer, is where the economic practices, where agriculture, transportation, energy, it's the technological and material foundations of our culture. At the structural layer, we have our social and our organizational systems. That's where education and justice, our decision-making, choice-making processes, otherwise known as governance. And at the superstructure layer, that's where worldview and ideologies and spirituality and values and beliefs and cultural narratives come in. That's where the arts and the spirituality and media tend to be placed in this model. Now, Harris was a Marxist, and so he tended to look, you can see from the title of his book, Cultural Materialism. If you're going to think about the causal connection between these layers, he tended to draw it this way, that in fact, our economic system, our agriculture system determines our structural systems and our worldviews. If you're coming more from a consciousness-centric perspective, then you will see the sort of the causality in the opposite direction. What we believe, what we think, that's what is manifested in our structure and infrastructure layers. Probably a more accurate representation to see them as co-arising and co-evolving. Our beliefs shape our structure and infrastructure, but our infrastructure reinforces our beliefs. So these layers are co-arising and co-evolving together. So one way to think about cultural evolution is in terms of these three layers. Another way to think about it is to use Bill Sharp's three horizons model, where horizon one is focused on activities that are happening in the present moment. It's like kind of what changes are possible right now within the current dominant systems and practices. Now, recognizing that these are going to have to be replaced if we're trying to achieve a fundamental shift. Horizon one changes are not enough, and anything we do here will need to be replaced or evolve. But it can be an important way of mitigating pain in the present and starting to change towards horizon two, which is really around the transitional innovations. That's where we see ideas and trends that are really start to challenge some of the assumptions in horizon one and start to imagine how things could be different. So there's experimentation here, viewed through the lens of horizon one. People operating in horizon two can be seen as risky or unconventional. But finally, if we're going to accomplish fundamental shift, major transformation, we need to have people focused on building the future models. These are the transformative systems and the entirely new paradigms that give rise to our cultural manifestations. And so these are going to be seen as radical ideas. There are going to be radical innovations. And again, look through the lens of horizon one and horizon two. They're going to seem like outliers or too futuristic, right? Unrealistic. That's crazy stuff, right? The important thing about this framing is that action is required in all three horizons at the same time. So it would be a mistake to look at these in a linear fashion and say, okay, this year we do what we can in horizon one, next year we'll do horizon two, and then 5 years from now, we'll start working on building those future models. No, all three are required at the same time. We need people doing action, taking action in all three horizons all the time in order to help accelerate the great transition, this great cultural shift. And so if we're going to map this great transition from material culture to planetary culture, we can look at it through the lens of these three layers on these three horizons. And again, action is needed in all three horizons, and it's needed in all three layers. So if we start by thinking about horizon one in the superstructure, what we see is messages that build environmental awareness, right? The messages of social activism. And that's starting to emerge, and that's starting to change minds a bit in horizon one. But horizon one is still dominated by the progress through economic growth narrative, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, both parties cite economic growth as the key to sort of nation state health, right? So they're still caught in that material culture stage. Individualism, consumerism, and competition also continue to dominate as the memes that capture our mind share. In the structural layer, we begin to see regulatory frameworks that offer some environmental protections. We begin to see the introduction of corporate social responsibility programs, DEI initiatives, but again, still operating in material culture, still dominated by centralized power and decision-making, still focused on money and profit. And in the infrastructure layer, we see this explosion of NGOs that are, thank God, arising in response to all of the externalized pain that our current extractive, exploitative economic system is foisting on the world. So there's some really sacred work happening there, really heartfelt work, often a great personal sacrifice, people that are ministering to the pain. I was at an IONS conference in 2003. I think, I'm not sure they originated this phrase, but this is when it landed for me and I carried it with me. We need to hospice out the old and we need to midwife in the new. So hospicing has to do with managing and mitigating and easing the suffering of an inevitable transition. It's not fighting against the reality of it. It's recognizing what needs to pass and easing the pain to the greatest extent possible. And that's really beautiful and sacred work. And that's how I tend to think of the work in NGOs. It's people that are really trying to mitigate the pain, trying to minister to those that are suffering. But we also need to midwife in the new, and that's going to carry us into the other horizons, right? In Horizon 1, in the infrastructure layer, we see the introduction of recycling, focus on energy efficiency starts to emerge, but we're still largely caught up in material extraction. We're still highly addicted to fossil fuels. We're still operating in the linear consumption, throwaway economic model. Organic farming is beginning to grow, but it's still within the context of the industrial ag model. And again, economic growth, mass production, and global trade are still the name of the game here. So if we move from Horizon 1 to Horizon 2, we begin to see shifts in the cultural narrative, right? This notion of maybe competition isn't all we need. Maybe collaboration would be good. This beginning to reemerge, reconnect with the nature of the interconnectedness of all reality, to maybe consider the possibility of our role as stewards instead of exploiters of the earth. And popular culture in movies and books and podcasts and films and so forth start to reflect these emerging values. We start to see experimental experiments conducted in institutional structures and practices. So we start to see some grassroots governance models, things like sociocracy, holacracies, cooperatives are starting to emerge, more models of participatory democracies. We get into global agreements on climate action. But these are all fragile and relatively fringe shifts towards cooperation and sustainability. In the infrastructure layer, we're seeing a growth in renewable energy, in composting, small local experiments in sustainable agriculture and sustainable circular economies. We see things like impact investing in B Corps and public benefit corporations emerging. Because these are still, though, largely rooted in the memes of material culture, and because it's simply the power of the current dynamics of the culture, a lot of these Horizon 2 innovations tend to get captured by Horizon 1 activities. They tend to get sucked into this, where you things like greenwashing or other forms of enclosure. So Horizon 2 isn't going to get us to the great transition. We need work in Horizon 3. We need to midwife in the new, right? We need to build those future models. At the superstructural layer, it means cultural and spiritual narratives that celebrate the interconnectedness of all life and see humanity as stewards, where our art and media reflect the beauty of our natural systems, emphasizing wholeness, balance, and interdependence. It's a remembering of indigenous wisdom, who never really embraced the memes of separation and exploitation and domination, right? So it's a rediscovery, and you see a lot of re-injection of indigenous thinking and a valuing of indigenous wisdom. More decentralized power and decision-making, bioregionally organized global cooperation, trusteeship models that instead of nation states focusing on corporate interest, we prioritize planetary health and social equity. Healthy networks of well-stewarded commons, regenerative ag, renewable energy, a polyculture. Instead of the monoculture of the global economic system, in Horizon 3, we see the emergence of a polyculture of regenerative closed-loop economies patterned after living systems. So I found this framing helpful, partially to deal with the overwhelm, right? So it was just like, whoa, way too much to think about everything that's involved in this great transition when I sort of try and take it all in at once. But segmenting in this way, I hope helps people figure out where they're drawn. I think people will be naturally drawn to different parts of this map, if you will, and recognize that because we need action in all three horizons and all three layers, whatever sector in here that you're drawn to, that work is beautiful and needed. And so do it, do what you're called to. And so for me, when I wonder sometimes if I should be doing volunteering more in NGOs, um, it helps me to recognize, okay, no, that's actually not my calling. I have a calling, but it also increases my appreciation for the people that are doing that, as I mentioned earlier. So when I look at this map, I also help me understand like the focus of the projects I'm involved in. So I see the focus of the Planet Project as really trying to accelerate this shift in this cultural narrative, in the shift of consciousness. And whereas the design school, I think Joe has been very clear about not wasting time trying to convince people that civilization has collapsed. It's that notion of collapse awareness. It's like you can spend your time trying to open people's eyes, but we need some people focused on, okay, that's a given. Now, what are we going to do about it? And that's where I see the design school operating. You know, I think of Bucky Fuller's famous quote about you don't change reality by fighting against it. You change reality by creating the new models that make the old model obsolete. That's what I see the design school is all about. That's what the Earth Regeneration Fund is about. That also is where my focus on the platform that I'll be introducing in session 2 is about. It's a platform for Horizon 3. And it looks radical and it looks futuristic and it looks unrealistic. And if it didn't, then it wouldn't be doing its job in Horizon 3. So that's where we're headed. So that's a lot I've covered. I've talked steady. Let me pause here and just see how this is landing for people and give people a chance to sort of weigh in. I'll also mention that I have a lot of material to get through in the first couple of sessions, but session 3 is going to be totally devoted to just having a conversation. So my apology for not allowing enough time in the first 2 sessions to really have a dialogue, but look forward to that in session 3. And Penny, I might ask at this point, has anything come through in the chat, or does anybody have any comments or observations they feel or questions to share at this point?
The only thing in the chat is from Claire, who is maybe Claire, you could speak it if you would like.
I would say you have an enthusiastic supporter.
Yeah.
Oh, I just want to say it's such a relief to hear others articulating things that like what you've pulled together is just it's just a relief to hear and to be here with others who I know are such good sense makers, that we're holding this together and moving forward together is amazing. So
yeah.
And Steve, I might just add a comment that I feel like what you're doing is like one of my favorite authors when I was a teenager was Stephen King, partly because he spends the first like third of the book developing characters. And then you're so caught up in the rich complexity of the characters that the stories are like amazing. And there's something about that ability to build up a context. And having explored a lot of these things, I'd say everything you're describing here is familiar to me because I've been swimming in similar waters. And then it's really important to set up just a clear context of it so that we can remember that we are definitely not being reductionistic. We're definitely not being partial. We're looking at truly transformational change. And truly transformational change is hard. And so, I used to have people tell me in the US, the typical reader has a 6th grade reading level. It's actually dropped to like 4th grade reading level now. But I'm like, but I'm not talking to everyone. I'm talking to people I'm talking to people who are doing what I'm doing, talking to my people. My audience is people that I'd want to do stuff with. And so it's really important to speak and think at the level of what we're dealing with. And what we're dealing with is we're dealing with transformation of cultural systems. So of course, and then systematizing it in the way you did does feel manageable, even though you and I both know that doing it in practice is really hard. That's
Yeah, indeed. Shannon.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much. I loved your Three Horizons layout there. And before you said, look for your calling, I applauded myself right away. And I find that I struggle. I feel like I have a lot of skills that I can apply in a lot of places. And so sometimes I'm struggling where to put my energy, or I overcommit because I want to do it all. But when I had it all laid out there, I was like, bam, I know where I need to be. And like, I know it inside, but it was really cool to see it laid out that way. So thank you. That helped like give me a little clarity, but it's
That's
great. Thank
awesome.
you.
That's awesome. Yeah. It served that purpose for me as well. So I'm so glad that you had that insight. Chris.
I just wanted to say very quickly that I love being in a place where I feel like I might be one of the least informed people in the room. Uh, I feel like you laid out so much there so beautifully that I feel like I've got, a reading list now for the next, quite some time of material to digest. And I just love where you're going with this. And to Joe's comment about, yeah, this stuff is hard. There's a lot of complexity here, but it's such a joy to be in this space where we're kind of jointly trying to figure out a way to describe this all. Yeah, anyway, so I'm just really excited by what you're laying out here, and yeah, just grateful for this presentation and what's to come.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Well, we got a long ways to go. So I'm going to pick up. That's basically the context as Joe was.
Roger's got his hand up as well.
But it's hard to see.
It's in the corner and hard to see in his image. So yeah, if Roger has something he'd like to share.
Thanks. Just very quickly, Steve, that was great. Of course, I'm familiar with a lot of that, but just seeing it laid out in that such a clear way. So brilliant, beautiful. We got to grab some of that and record it and capture
it. Yeah, we will.
All right.
So nobody wants civilizational collapse. And here I'm going to cite the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger. I assume most people are on this call are familiar with his work. I would highly recommend this 2-part video on the third attractor, where he really paints this story in a compelling way, but that our current systems for coordinating collective action are caught in entangled webs of multipolar traps and perverse incentives. So we've got this global economic system that's extractive, exploitive, growth addicted, and polarizing. Our political systems are, the democracies are being co-opted by economic interests. I think we're all seeing the polarization. They're designed around 18th century information technology, where information was carried literally on horseback. And we see autocracies rising with a dystopian loss of personal freedoms. Social systems fragmented, educational systems just perpetuate the status quo, agricultural systems, and so forth. The meta crisis is a collective action failure. That's the point here. It's a failure of collective action. It's leading to a future that nobody wants, but we're systemically locked into this trajectory. And yes, there are bad actors, but the bad actors are also manifestations of the systemic nature of our culture that's rooted back in those foundations of separation and domination and exploitation. So there's a real call to action. Our economic system, our concept of money, our technology, our agriculture, our education, our governance, these are all rooted in, they are expressions of, and they serve to reinforce and sustain the memes of material culture. And our systems for collective sense making, for making meaning, and for making choices, those are all breaking down, right? We can't even agree on what is truth anymore. And so just at the time when we most need to be acting collectively for our joint benefit, these systems are breaking down. And we see asymmetric power and this technology that's exponentially progressing in both scope and pace. It's being wielded by those that are most invested in the material culture. that being the interconnected engines of global commerce. And so the call to action is to, again, to avoid civilizational collapse, demands a profound shift in culture at global scale, a reimagining of who we are and how we interact as participants in the web of life. Okay, but what can I do? So I get to this point. We all have gotten to this point to varying degrees, and I think we all face this question. But this question is rooted, the way I frame this, in terms of, oh, we need to avoid the bad shit, right? We need to avoid civilizational collapse. It's, in some respects, can be fear-based, right? So before I go on, I want to change the framing a little bit to point out that we can have a very different future. If we can enable and empower coherent and cooperative collective action, and if we can do that at all scales, going all the way up to commons and bioregions and planetary organisms, we could have a very different culture. And in fact, imagine the world we could have if our economic system, our concept of money, our technology, our agriculture, our education, our governance, what if all of those were rooted in, were expressions of, and serve to reinforce and sustain the memes of planetary culture? We just need to take that in. That's the positive attractor, right? It's not operating in fear of the collapse. It's operating in response, being pulled forward by the aspiration of the future we could have. And yet again, the question insists itself. Great, but what can I do? The last couple of slides closed with the provocative question, what can I do? In the Design School series, I shared my personal struggle with that question and the answers that emerged for me. But here I want to invite you to reflect on this question for yourself. Are you struggling with the question of what you can do to help manifest a flourishing Earth? If so, I invite you to explore some Planet Project resources that were specifically created to address this question. And no, this is not a sales pitch. These resources are a free gift that we're offering without strings attached. They're not a freemium tease to get you to buy some paid subscription or product or course or what have you. So we have two curated databases you can get at on our website, again, planetproject.io. The first is a positive culture, and this is videos, articles, blogs, podcasts, books, what have you, that are all designed to both exemplify and provide compelling evidence that this cultural shift, this great transition, is in fact happening. We also have a database of what we call aligned change agents that has more than 200 people and organizations that are on the forefront of this evolutionary shift. And you can join our online Planet community to connect with fellow travelers. You can read our past newsletters or subscribe to our upcoming newsletters, and you can do the same for our blogs, past and future, or vlogs if they become a thing. We do conduct many virtual events, occasional live events here in Boulder, Colorado. So if you find yourself in Boulder, give us a shout out, say hi. I'd love to connect with you here in person. Finally, I'd like to suggest you check out our self-paced learning journey, the Journey to Activation. This is a 3-month course that we put together last year, and now it's available as an archive on our Planet community. So all the recordings, all the collateral, all the exercises, all the conversations that ensued, it's all available for self-paced consumption. It was specifically designed to help you discover ways to deepen your personal response to the meta crisis, to truly feel like you are making a difference. So thank you for being here. I invite you to join the conversation. Let's co-create a future where humanity and the planet can thrive.